The day I stepped into the forgotten manor was supposed to be a straightforward excursion. I had been tracing the roots of local legends for a book I was researching, eager to piece together the past from whispers and crumbling documents. Hidden deep within the forgotten swathes of the forest, the manor was a crumbling silhouette on the horizon as I approached. The sky hung heavy and gray, clashing with the vibrant disbelief that something as grand as a manor could be swallowed so completely by wilderness and obscurity. The forest was denser than I had anticipated. Each step forward felt like an intrusion as branches snagged at my clothes and roots threatened to trip me. Birds, disturbed by my presence, scattered into the bleak skies, their cries echoing the unease building in my gut. I kept my camera slung over my shoulder, the weight of it reassuring against my back. I continually reassured myself this was merely another sight, another chapter in my book. But as the trees finally broke open to reveal the manor in its melancholic grandeur, my breath caught. The building stood larger than life, its once fine structures consumed by ivy and rot. The windows, or what remained of them, appeared like dark, unblinking eyes. A wave of isolation washed over me, stunning in its intensity. There wasn't just solitude here, there was abandonment, a forsaken air that was almost tangible. With a glance over my shoulder to the patchy path I had come through, I stepped closer. The front door, massive and warped, was off its hinges slightly, allowing the interior's musty breath to meet the outside air. I pushed it open with the back of my hand, regretting the disturbance as the door groaned terribly. The sound seemed to travel through the hollow spaces of the house, unsettling dust motes that danced in the stale light, filtering through gaping holes in the roof. Inside, everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and debris. As I moved through what once would have been a grand foyer, every footstep echoed unsettlingly around me. The remnants of a chandelier lay shattered across the floor, its crystals catching feeble rays of light and throwing them against the walls in ghostly sparkles. The further I ventured, the more the manor seemed to resist my presence. Floorboards creaked underfoot, holding my weight begrudgingly. In some places, wallpaper hung in tattered ribbons, displaying undercoats of paint that might have been vibrant once, now muted and morose. My flashlight beam caught on something, a shattered frame on a side table. I moved closer, the image unsettlingly familiar. It was a family smiling out of the past, unaffected by the decay around them. Their eyes, though faded, seemed to follow me, and I quickly moved on. As afternoon bled into evening, shadows grew long and more pronounced. Each room I entered felt colder than the last, the air growing inexplicably chillier, as if the house itself was exhaling its damp, cold breath down my neck. I shook off the feeling, focusing instead on the architectural features and any items of interest for my camera. Then I found the staircase, curling upwards into darkness. Compelled by a mix of dread and curiosity, I began to ascend, the wood protesting with each step. At the top, the hallway stretched into shadows that my flashlight seemed reluctant to pierce. It was then that I heard it, a low moaning sound from the end of the hallway. It was not the wind. I had become accustomed to its howling whispers outside. This was different, a lament, a cry. My heart raced, rational thoughts clashing with primal fear. The sound ebbed away as quickly as it had come. Moments later, redoubling my faltering courage, I stepped towards where the sound had emerged from. Perhaps there was an animal in distress. As I advanced, the air grew markedly colder, my flashlight beam flickering unnervedly. I stopped at a door slightly ajar. Hesitant, yet unable to turn back, I nudged it open with my foot. Inside, the room appeared untouched by time compared to the rest of the house. A bed, neatly made, lay against one wall. A desk, papers stacked neatly, as if waiting for the owner to return and pen a letter. But it was the mirror on the far wall that drew my attention. In the dim light, I could see my reflection staring back at me, pale and distorted. The air shifted, a whisper of movement. I turned sharply, flashlight beam wild, heart pounding against my ribs. It was then I realized. The moaning had resumed, soft and sorrowful, right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight finally steady in my trembling hands, illuminating the now empty corridor outside the room. The sudden silence was overwhelming. Only my ragged breathing sounding in my ears as I faced the dark, empty hallway, knowing in that moment the manor wasn't as abandoned as I hoped. I hesitated, the weight of the silence pressing against me like a palpable shroud. My mind raced, tempting me with the idea of retreating back. Down the staircase, away from the eerie cry that seemed to resonate from nowhere and everywhere. Yet, something about the manor called to me, an inexplicable pull that threaded through my being, urging me to delve deeper into its mysteries. With a steadying breath, I stepped forward, my flashlight's beam a feeble outpost in the encroaching darkness. Each footfall felt like a transgression, the silence amplifying until it was almost as tangible as the dust swirling in the cold, dead air. The hallway stretched on, a narrow throat choked with shadows that seemed to move just beyond the reach of my light. The walls were lined with portraits, faces from a bygone era, their expressions pinched and somber, as if they too felt the weight of the manor's decay. The moaning had ceased, but the silence left in its wake was no relief. It was a cessation of breath before a plunge. I felt it in my bones, the sense that I was being watched. There was a charge in the air, a faint, electric prickling at the back of my neck. I paused, the beam of my flashlight catching on a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, inviting yet foreboding. With a mixture of dread and determination, I approached the door, pushing it open with an outstretched finger. The room beyond was stark in its simplicity compared to the layered decay of the rest of the manor. A single bed, its sheets pristine and white, stood out like a beacon. A wardrobe, its doors closed, was flush against one wall. The air here felt different, stiller, if possible, and heavier, as though it had been undisturbed for far longer than the rest of the house. Then my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw it. On the nightstand beside the bed, a photograph in a silver frame. I moved closer, the flashlight in my hand trembling slightly as the beam settled on the image. It was a picture of the manor, taken from a distance. The family from the previous photo stood in front of the house, the same one from the shattered frame downstairs. But something was wrong. Their positions were altered, their expressions twisted into grimaces of fear and pleading, as if they were aware of their own frozen scream. The realization hit me hard, a wave of nausea that had little to do with the stale air. These were not merely residents of the past, they were prisoners, bound to the manor as surely as the ivy that ensnared its stone walls. And as I stood there, staring at the photograph, a low sound began to fill the room. Not a moan this time, but a whisper, so soft it was almost drowned out by the pounding of my own heart. "Help us," it said, a voice so desperate, so achingly human, that my skin prickled with dread. "Free us." The words echoed around the room, seeping into the wooden floorboards and the plaster walls, reverberating with a sorrow that was almost tangible. I shivered, a deep, soul-wrenching shiver that seemed to crack the very marrow of my bones. The house, the manor itself, was alive, sentient, and suffering. And somehow it knew I was here. It knew I could hear it. I backed away from the photograph, my gaze darting around the room as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Free us," they implored, overlapping and intertwining until they were a cacophony of despair. The decision loomed before me, stark and undeniable. To flee would mean survival, a return to normalcy, to a world unaffected by the tortured souls of a timeless manor. But to stay could mean delving deeper into the heart of the darkness, unraveling its secrets, and perhaps finding a way to answer the cries for liberation that echoed through the cold, dark chambers of the forgotten house. My hand was on the door, the wood cool beneath my fingers. The hallway awaited, a tunnel back into the light or further into the shadows. I took a deep breath, the whisper of tormented spirits buzzing in my ears like a siren's call. The choice was mine, and mine alone. Pushing the door open further, its hinges complained with a shrill squeal that seemed to pierce through the lingering silence like a cry of warning. Yet, compelled by an indefinable resolve, I stepped into the darkness of the hallway. Each step felt like a descent into a realm forgotten by time and forsaken by daylight. The air grew cooler, the whisper of the spirits now melding into an unintelligible chorus that filled the passageway with a haunting melody of despair and yearning. As I ventured deeper, the light from the entrance dimmed, swallowed by the encroaching gloom that seemed imbued with a petulant spite. My flashlight flickered erratically, as though struggling against an unseen force determined to thrust me into blind terror. Ahead, the hallway forked, presenting two paths. One veered slightly to the right, a narrow passage that ended in an opaque curtain of darkness. The other to the left, where at the very edge of my flashlight's struggling beam, something glistened faintly, like eyes catching the light. Yet not eyes, but rather the polished brass handle of a door, curiously well-maintained amidst the decay. Driven by an inexplicable instinct, I turned towards the door with the brass handle. As I approached, I noticed a soft, violet light seeping out from the edges, pulsing gently like the breath of the house. Intrigued and unnerved, I reached out and grasped the handle, its cool metal a stark contrast to the tepid air around me. Gently pushing it open, the room beyond bathed me in a surreal glow. It was a library, vast and ancient, filled with rows upon rows of dust-covered books. The light emanated from a singular orb floating in the center of the room. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, casting shadows that danced along the walls and shelves like trapped spirits performing a macabre waltz. Drawn to the orb, I walked between the aisles, my hands brushing against the spines of the books, feeling the whispers of 1,000 lost voices etched in their pages. As I neared the floating light, I realized it was not merely an orb, but a sort of luminescent sphere, within which a myriad of faces, contorted in silent screams, appeared and vanished in rapid succession. It was as if the very essence of the manor's tormented souls were captured within, each face a fleeting testament to the horror and despair that pervaded these walls. Mesmerized, I reached out a hand towards the sphere. No sooner had my fingers brushed its surface than the room filled with a chorus of clear, desperate voices. "Release us," they cried in unison, their tones so earnest that my heart quailed at the thought of their prolonged suffering. Retracting my hands swiftly, I stepped back, the sphere's light dimming slightly, as though offended by my hesitance. The weight of my decision pressed heavily upon me. Was this the heart of the manor's curse? Could I, a mere trespasser in this domain of despair, grant these souls the release they sought? Then, from somewhere deep within the shadows of the library, a low, guttural growl echoed, stirring the dust and sending a ripple of fear through the air. The room grew colder, the light from the orb now flickering like a dying heartbeat. I realized then that the manor was not merely a prison, but also a predator, and I was within its lair, surrounded by both its victims and its wrath. Movement at the far end of the library caught my eye, a shadow, darker than the ambient darkness, shifting, growing. I understood then the nature of my peril, glimpsing the true depth of the horror. This was no sanctuary of sorrow, but a chamber of bait and trap. As the growl crescendoed to a roar, the decision tore at me. Should I flee, leaving the souls to their eternal damnation, or confront whatever lurked in the shadows, potentially freeing them or joining them in their fate? The darkness at the end of the library took form, a massive, amorphous silhouette that seemed to suck in the scant light. And I knew then that the sanctuary was collapsing, the predator closing in. My hand tightened around the flashlight, the only weapon against the encroaching night, as the spirits, pleading, filled my ears, a symphony of desperation and doom. With each pulse of the flashlight, shadows twisted and flickered around the edges of the room, casting grotesque imitations of life that writhed upon the book-laden walls. My breath formed visible clouds in the air, the temperature plunging with the rising dread that tightened its icy grip around my heart. The silhouette, once indefinable, began to manifest into a more discernible form. Large, looming, its contours warped as if seen through water. The spirit's cries escalated, piercing the heavy shroud of darkness with their urgency. "Do not falter. Stand your ground." They seemed to encircle me, a vortex of voices spinning wildly, each plea laced with ancient despair and an echo of endless torment. Drawing a shallow, steely breath, I steadied my trembling hand, aiming the beam of the flashlight directly into the heart of the growing darkness. The light seemed feeble, almost devoured by the profound blackness it sought to penetrate, but I held it unwaveringly, clinging to it as my sole beacon in the burgeoning nightmare. Then, silently and with an unnerving grace, the silhouette began to move toward me, its form undulating with a sinister fluidity. As the distance between us dwindled, the details of its presence became horrifically clear. It was as if the darkness itself had stitched together fragments of every creature that had ever stalked these cursed halls, creating a patchwork of nightmare flesh. Eyes where there should be none, mouths agape in silent screams, limbs bending at impossible angles. The orb light flickered wildly then, as if caught in the throes of a storm. Amidst the chaos of light and dark, a revelation struck me with the weight of all the trapped souls bearing down upon my conscience. This creature, this amalgamate of horrors, was not just a guardian of the manor's curse. It was the curse itself, a sentinel formed from the very substance of the house's malevolence. Pausing only a moment, my resolve hardened. The spirits needed release, and this abomination barred the way. "I will not be turned aside," I declared, though my voice trembled as the words sliced through the thick, oppressive air. The creature stopped, as though surprised by my audacity. In that brief halt, its form flickered, and for a heartbeat, it seemed less solid, less inevitable. Encouraged, I took a step forward, my flashlight held forth like a sword against shadow. The symbol of light against dark, of human will against spectral chains. "How do I free them?" I demanded, addressing the creature, but also the spirits whirling around me. "Tell me." To my astonishment, the room fell silent, the creature's eyes, too many, and yet hauntingly human, fixated on me. Then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a gale, it responded, its tone layered with the cries of the souls it consumed. "Destroy the heart." My gaze snapped to the orb, still pulsing erratically. A new horror dawned upon me. The orb was not merely a prison but a power source, fueling the curse from within. To break the curse, I must shatter the orb. But at what cost? Would the destruction unleash something even more dreadful? A scream from within the mass of trapped faces jolted me from my hesitation. It was a clear, human scream, filled with pain and pleading. The decision was made. Facing the creature, I charged, dodging a swipe of its grotesque limb as I dove past it toward the orb. Its surface felt alive under my touch, thrumming with all the stolen life it held. With every ounce of strength and desperation I possessed, I hurled the flashlight straight at the pulsing heart of the manor's horror. The flashlight collided with the orb, and the impact sounded like the breaking of the world. A blinding light erupted, consuming the room, the house, and the night beyond. The creature howled, a sound that seemed to split the very air. And then everything went silent. I awoke amidst rubble and dawn light. The manor was no more, reduced to remnants and dust around me. Slowly I rose, my body aching, my mind reeling from the remnants of terror. Yet, as I stood, I realized the air felt different, lighter. The oppressive despair was gone, replaced by a tentative peace. Had I succeeded? Had I freed them? In the clearing smoke and settling dust, I could hear it finally, real silence, not filled with whispers or cries, but just silence. True and complete. I looked around the ruins one final time, then turned my back on what was left of the cursed domain, stepping into the new light of day, uncertain of many things, but sure of one. The manor's horrors were no more.